Hi, everybody. It's Christina, and I hope you are doing so well today. It is Friday, and spring is finally here, and it's so exciting. It's just been so nice to have the sun out, to have nice weather. So I know that we actually went through like a lot of the United States just went through this thing where they had like a frost going on, and you could see like out in Colorado there was like some snow and stuff like that. We didn't get that. It missed us, but we did get like some really high winds and stuff like that. So, other than that, it has been smooth sailing into spring, and it's been really exciting. All right, so if you are here, could you let me know if you can hear and see me okay? Can we do a sound check really quickly? Today, we're going to be talking about the fairy realm. Hi, Janet. Hi, Tina. Good to see you guys. Glad to see you guys here. Okay, so why are we talking about the fairy realm? Well, I am going to be doing I'm actually going to be participating in Susie's Beltane Bash this year, and Beltane Bash is all about it's a Celtic holiday, Celtic Wiccan pagan type of holiday. Hi Tina, thank you, sounds good. And so the theme is, Celtic lore or, some type of spring type of theme. So I'm going to be presenting, and that's going to be happening on May 1st. I will be giving you guys some more information about that. If you are in the Facebook group, then you can go to the event section and you can get that information there. There's an event tab. It has like the time, the date, and things like that. But I wanted to do a two-part series. Hi, Victoria. Thank you so much. I wanted to do a two-part series because when I do my workshop in a couple weeks for the Beltane Bash, I'm going to be talking about how to make allies with the fairy kingdom and how to work with them to bring more prosperity and abundance into your life. However, if you are someone who doesn't really work with the fairies or doesn't really know very much about the fairies, then it might be a little bit too advanced. So I thought I would take some time and do kind of like a brief, sort of as brief as my workshops are and my discussions and videos are. They're not very, but as brief as, as much information as we can put into, let's say, the next hour and a half about what the fairy realm is, who are the fairies, where does it come from, is it even a good idea to work with them, and how we can kind of work with them, like, just kind of stepping into how we can kind of work with them. More of that's going to be on May 1st. And is it a good idea? And is there any potential danger involved? So there's a lot of information out there about fairies. There's a lot of ideas about what fairies are, especially in modern terms, especially in neo-paganism. There is there's even a whole fairy tradition. There's even a whole fairy type of Wicca or witchcraft. And so there has been sort of this like renaissance or like a revival of the fairy realms. And with it comes a lot of different ideas depending on like, which side of the fence you're on or what tradition you come from about the nature of fairies. So there's a group of people out there who believe that fairies are all love and light. Hi, Mario. Good to see you. And that they can do no wrong and that they are similar to angels. And this is kind of like been perpetuated by like the Doreen Virtue kind of, new age kind of spirituality and things like that. There is a tendency to kind of lump fairies in with angels, and we're going to kind of talk about that. Are they angels? Are they not angels? That sort of thing. There's another subsect of people that believe that fairies are inherently evil and that they're malevolent, meaning that they do not have good intentions and that we should not work with them. And then, we have Tinkerbell, like Victoria is saying, and then we also have like pop culture where we have like, icons and idols like Tinkerbell. from Peter Pan and from Neverland, from the Neverland series. Kind of is the love and light kind of fairy, and Tinkerbell really tends to be like what we all kind of think of fairies. That tends to be like the archetype that we've adopted. But previously, that's only been within the last, let's say, 100 years or something like that. Um, the previous, we had Shakespeare before that, which was more of like not necessarily like little tiny fairies, but like magical kind of people, where the fairies weren't necessarily like little critters or little beings. They were more of just like a magical type of people. And then we also have, even before that, we have the ideas of the icon, the imagery of fairies as being kind of like these more twisted, gnarled, decrepit, evil looking kind of little troll like beings, right? So there's a whole lot of ideas about what fairies are, what they look like, that sort of thing. There's a whole lot of that out there. Mario says fairies don't play like that, but totally evil. Nah. So yeah, we're going to talk about that. So what do you guys think? I'm curious. If you want to put into the comments below, and then I'll start talking about what we're going to talk about today. What do you guys think? Are fairies all love and light? Like, what is your personal image idea of fairies? And there's no wrong answer. Like, it's not like I'm going to say you're wrong or anything like that. Just everybody has their own idea of fairies. And I think it's important that we actually honor everybody's idea of fairies. But today I want to share kind of like more my ideas behind fairies. And this is more going to be based upon like original Celtic lore and things like that. And not necessarily like the Doreen Virtue kind of pop culture, poppy kind of idea of what fairies are. Hi, LaTanya. Good to see you. Mario says there's no Tinkerbell. Well, there is a Tinkerbell, and she lives within our heart. I love Tinkerbell. I have some really nice limited edition, like early Tinkerbell. I have the Tinkerbell Barbie doll. I have some Tinkerbell stuff too. So don't get me wrong. I love Tinkerbell, but Tinkerbell is not necessarily, what we're going to be talking about today. Mario says fairies have their culture. There's good and not so good. Got to know the rules. That's a good. Tina says fairies to me are a connection to Mother Earth. Exactly. Latanya says I've always wanted to know more about this subject. Cool. So let's go ahead and dig into this. Let me pull up my notes here. So what are fairies? Well, fairies are beings of light. They are fully conscious and sentient, but they're not intelligent in the way that us humans would view intelligence. Like, we think of intelligence as far as like innovation, problem solving, that sort of thing. There is a sentience. They are sentient beings, but they are not what we would call intelligent beings. Okay. So they're more, they run off of more, they're very ancient. So they run off more of these more ancient kind of programs, the more primal kind of programs. The way I kind of think of fairies as far as like intelligence and sentience goes is that I would think of them as like intelligence wise as smart as a maybe 3, 4, 5-year-old child, or like a really, really smart dog. They have some, problem solving skills and things like that, but most of them do live within their ego, which is just a reactionary state. Ego's not bad. Ego just means how much of your actions are response, or based on reaction instead of response, right? So, we kind of think of them as having like rationality or logical thinking of, maybe a young child, a very smart young child, but not the intelligence that we would perceive as, being able, they do think for themselves, but they don't really think in terms of like, they don't really think about what's important to humans, if that makes sense. They think more about what's important to the environment. Hi, Pamela. Pamela says, someone said I was of the Fae. Have no idea they were at the time. Hi, Kathy. Good to see you. Victoria, consider the leprechaun archetype to be fairy. It's a type of elemental. Yeah, it's a type of elemental for sure. And we're going to talk about elementals and we tend to think of the fairy kind of miniature person kind of icon of the fairy, but in fact the fairy realm is vast, and actually most fairies don't actually look alike. There's many different types of fairies, and they all look very different. So do fairies actually exist? Well, the truth is that fairies really only exist if you believe in them. They exist in and of themselves, meaning that they are like ancient programs that are, responsible for regulating the environment. And when we go in more into the elementals, I'll talk more about like the different programs that they run. And I say program, and that might be, kind of an abstract word for what I'm trying to say. But, the way I would kind of make this more understandable is we think about like the inherent programs that we run, which is, find food, get shelter, procreate, create offspring, build a community, like these very basic, like, doesn't matter where you are in the world. And it doesn't matter really, if you are, if you've been nurtured or if it's part of nature. There are these natural programs that everything that is alive runs, and it's based off of, DNA. It's based off of these primal instincts and things like that. So that's what I mean by program. So I hope that makes sense with everybody. Latanya says, I've heard of them, but not seen them. They woke me up in the middle of the night laughing and playing. And that's really cool. That's really neat. And, fairies are going to exist whether we believe in them or not. But, our belief does strengthen their power. And I'm going to talk about why. Because yes, they're going to exist whether we believe them or not, but their power will grow when we believe in them. And it's really important that we raise that power now, because if we think about the immortality of the fairy realm, fairies are not immortal, though they can live an immortal life, and I'll explain that. They are immortal up to the point in which their habitat remains alive, up until the point where, wherever they are, wherever they've been sanctioned to govern and regulate in the world, stays viable. And so, especially with our earth-based and water-based fairies, these ones are in extreme jeopardy right now. We're seeing the changes. We're seeing climate change. We're seeing global warming. We're seeing the oceans begin to rise. We're seeing the glaciers begin to melt. Things are changing, right? We're also seeing the mass deforestation of the rainforests. I mean, we're seeing all of these, even in the United States, we have forests that are just continually being cut down because we need more and more land to grow, corn and grain and stuff like that. And as we see these changes, the lifespan, the energy of the fairies is definitely dwindling. And as we take away their habitats, fairies die. Because they are programmed to be very specific things. It's not like, a fairy can just plop over across the continent or change into its elements, change into a different element, swim across the ocean and change again and then become something else. It's not really like that. They are very much location based, meaning that there's going to be certain fairy guardians of certain areas, and that's really not going to change unless the actual landscape changes. And so there's natural things that happen, and that's just part of the cycle of life and death. But there is an alarming amount of the decrease in our natural environment going on right now, where fairies are dying at like a rapid rate. We're losing a lot of our land and our environments and our natural habitats, especially for the animals and things like that. It's really sad. And so we really need to work with the fairy realm, become allies with the fairy realm, so we can keep the energy alive. Because what happens when all the fairies die? Everything else dies. There's nothing, there's no stewards or, like land nurses left to kind of take care of things, to make sure that the spring comes around. And then, then we start seeing the chaotic weather. We start seeing snow in like May, like what happened a couple years ago, or we start seeing hot winters and things like that. So, all of these signs that we have going on with climate change and stuff like that, our ancestors would look at that and they would be freaked out and they would say, we need to do something about this. It would be almost apocalyptic to our ancestors who, well, some of our ancestors, anyways. Actually, most cultures have some sort of fairy element to it. We're going to talk about that here in a minute, but most cultures actually have some sort of reverence for land spirits or nature spirits of some sort. So, fairies just, the fairy realm is universal, but every culture kind of calls it something a little bit different. Yeah, like the bees, Victoria says. Like the bees are dying out, like the bees can be a kind of fairy. So, yeah, absolutely. So, are fairies evil? Well, mm, okay. So, to really understand this question and like where it really comes from, and to really understand why fairies get such a bad rap or why fairies are seen as being evil, we also have the Islamic view of the jinn, the fire elementals. That kind of plays into that too. I'm not going to talk too much about that today. You can research that on your own. I'll bring it up again when we do talk more about the elementals. But fairies themselves are Celtic. So the word, the fairy, the idea of a fairy is Celtic. But Hindus believe in devas. Shamans or animistic kind of traditions believe in nature spirits. Okay, so they're, universal. But specifically the fairy, there is a origin of the fairy. And so we look to the Tuatha De Danann, and the Tuatha De Danann are like the original mystical people that inhabited Ireland or like the British Isles. Okay, and they were inhabited them around maybe like 4,000 years ago or so, maybe a little bit longer. And they are one of the first peoples of Ireland. Actually, Ireland itself has no original peoples because they all came out of, Africa and things like that and came over this way. Ireland doesn't really have a rich original spirituality or animistic kind of like tradition. But what happened with Ireland is that it just kept getting raided and raided and raided and raided. People say or speculate that the Tuatha De Danann is the leftover people from Atlantis after the deluge. It's one theory out there. But they were a magical type of people that did invade Ireland about 4,000 years ago. They weren't the original people, but what happened was they invaded and Ireland kind of split into two. So you had the other people that were there in Ireland and the British Isles, because it's all kind of different now. We think of modern day Ireland, but that whole kind of area was contested, and then you bring in the Vikings and things like that, and you have a lot of chaos. But they basically split Ireland into two sets of you rule this part, I'll rule this part. Okay. And so what happened is that the Tuatha were like a more civilized people. The previous people were more like pagan, where they did have spiritual beliefs and things like that, but the Tuatha were more civilized, meaning they had sciences, and things like that. So they lived there peacefully for about 1,000 years or so. And then the Malaysians invaded. And so or Malaysians, however, Malaysians, I think it's Malaysians. But the Malaysians invaded, and they were from the Iberian Peninsula, which is like Hispania, which is like Spain, Portugal, south of Rome, Italy, that kind of area, like around the Mediterranean, that sort of area. And they took over, basically, and they invaded, and they decided to push the Tuatha people out. The Tuatha people, by the way, were a goddess cult. Not sure if you guys know that, but they did worship a river goddess named Danu or Dana, however you want to pronounce it. But they were a goddess cult, which is really interesting. Just a side note. But then the Malaysians were inhabiting Ireland, and there was like this mythos. Okay, so this is kind of where like the evilness of fairies kind of came about. So according to the lore, the Tuatha retreated into, they're called Shi, which are like fairy mounds, which are like really big hills. Okay. And so once the Tuatha were overthrown, uh, the lore is that these magical people would hide in these fairy mounds, and that they would come out at night under the moon, like in the if there was clouds, they might not come out, but they needed like the moonlight to be able to come out, okay, or to be protected or something like that. um and the mythos is that they would steal children, or they would kill livestock, things like that. Excuse me just one moment. With spring is allergies. So they would, they came up with all these lords because they basically wanted to villainize them. They wanted to villainize the Tuatha people. They knew they were magical, and they came up all these stories like they would steal children, or they would become like doppelgangers, where they could take human form, shapeshift to human form, and your wife could just come home one day and be a little bit different, and it was like the fairies had kidnapped her, and what you had in front of you was a fairy, and things like that. So we also have to really consider the context of the time period as well, because prior to landing in Ireland, most Iberian countries, Spain, Portugal, lower Italy, was actually of the Roman state religion, which are, like Venus, Jupiter, like that a polytheistic kind of hedonistic kind of religion. And we also, at the same point, because remember, this is like 1,000 years later, so this is kind of about the time where we have stories of Jesus, trying to basically overthrow the Jewish or the Roman and Jewish government, overthrow the Roman government, kind of, but really trying to overthrow the Jewish religion type of government, church type of thing. So it was a really, really chaotic time. And this whole idea of lumping fairies into being like evil. There's also speculation that fairies are fallen angels or demons, as far as like being under Lucifer, who is known as the Morning Star. We all know the story of him. So it was a really chaotic time. There was a lot of fighting going on. And that's kind of where not only did you have, the Gales coming in, the Malaysians coming in and taking over from the Roman state religion ideology. And then you have the beginnings of Christianity kind of, and then you have the pagans on the other side, and everybody was just kind of fighting. So that's kind of where the idea of fairies being evil came from. Victoria says, now those people are called Black Irish because they don't have stereotype light skin hair. Yes, and that's why a lot of Hispanic people actually have Irish DNA, because they were Hispanic, and they Mediterranean. They were like Hispanic Mediterranean people, have a lot of Irish DNA because of that. Very interesting. Or actually, it's the other way around. A lot of Irish people have Hispanic DNA and Italian DNA. That's the way. That's how it should work, not the other way around. Okay, so, branching out on the whole idea of fairies being fallen angels, or if you want to look at it through the Doreen Virtue kind of lens, the or the New Age kind of lens, we kind of have to question that, because to really understand that, you have to kind of understand the hierarchy of the angelic kingdom. So we have the fairy kingdom, we have the angelic kingdom. It just depends, because obviously the angelic kingdom is a Jewish and Islamic and a Christian/Catholic ideology, right? So fairies still across the board, but the culture and the values and the beliefs and things like that important to that culture definitely differ. So, I would say that fairies are not actually angels, but the idea of fairies and angels are like the same thing, but they aren't actually angels. But to keep it simple here, so if we look at the angelic kingdom, the hierarchy of that, which would, be a whole other, and in fact, I have a video on that. I might just go ahead and dig that up and see if it's any good still. I filmed that probably 2013, 2014, back when I was teaching about angels, about the hierarchy of angels. So I might actually have that. I'll have to dig for it. But we have to kind of dive into what angels are. So we tend to kind of think of angels as like celestial beings. Most of us do. So what are angels? Angels were God's first creation. So let's just pivot over to the Abrahamic religions for just a moment here. So angels were the first creation before man, and they are kind of charged with running the kingdom of creation. And they are like the guardians of earth, or, of actually all of it, the universe, physical matter. They are the guardians of physical matter. And so, or in our universe and other universes, who knows? Now we're even seeing science is telling us that our universe is just one ball in a sea of universes out there. So who really knows? But we tend to think of angels as being like only heavenly kind of beings. And, that's like, I would say that that's correct. I would say that that's mostly correct. I mean, most people, well, dang it, I'm a Libra, so I have to go to both places, the duality of it. That's just my dharma, unfortunately. I would say 90% of Abrahamic traditions believe that angels are inherently good. However, if you start looking more into the First Testament and you start looking more into the more ancient kind of ideology with Abrahamic religions, it was not really so. Angels would often show up in times of disaster. Angels would often kind of carry out the creator's kind of dirty work, if you will. And so there is this whole, still this whole side to it where the idea of angels does predate Christianity, but we can look also into, other kind of mythos, even similar in that same kind of vein, in that same kind of tree, where angels aren't necessarily all good either. And so to answer the question, are fairies angels? I would say fairies and angels are similar. as far as like the beings that they are of their true nature, but I wouldn't say fairies and angels are the same thing by any stretch. Because the popular belief tends to now be the angels are of love and light, of they are, they don't have free will. However, I think that's the most, okay, so that is the most important distinction in my opinion. The general belief is that angels do not have free will, and that if you petition an angel, you call upon an angel, they have no choice but to come and to protect you or to whatever. Fairies, on the other hand, they have their own free will. They are not obligated. They are not servants of humans, whereas angels were created to be literal servants of humans, stewards of humans. Would you like to see that? Okay, I'll try to find it. So it's a really broad spectrum, and we have to take into account that there are many different versions of what angels are. So it really just depends on what version you're comparing it to. And I know it's confusing, right? So are fairies like good then? Are they good or are they evil? Because if you've noticed, I've kind of said, well, they're a little bit of both, right? And the answer is that whether fairies are good or evil depends on who is interacting with the fairies. As I said before, fairies have free will. They are not bound by the creator. They are closer to us in terms of like where we kind of fit on the totem pole of creation, if you really believe in such a thing, right? But I wouldn't go so far as to say that fairies are necessarily like spiteful inherently or malevolent inherently. Like that's not like their main operation, but I really wouldn't say that they're benevolent either. And, whether a fairy is good or bad really directly relates to you. It relates to who is in their space. Because their most primal program is to protect their space, to protect the environment, right? Now, if their purpose and task is to regulate the environment, then it really depends on what kind of person you are if you're going to get the good or the bad side of a fairy. Fairies are extremely judgmental. They are very judgmental, right? They can make up their mind whether to mess with you or to help you. And we're going to talk about that more in like the second part of this, but we're going to talk about a little bit today too, like some of the things that we can do or how they actually judge us. Like what are the things that they actually judge us on, and what are some things that we're doing that might actually get us into trouble with the fairy kingdom. Victoria says, do angels have egos? Traditionally, angels do not have egos. Traditionally. Latanya says they are like magic. Magic can be used to help or harm depending on who is performing the magic. That's very correct, Latanya. Thank you for bringing that up because, yeah, fairies are, it is a type of magic. They are a magical type of being. I wouldn't say that angels are a magical type of being, but fairies definitely are a magical type of being. And so we have several different kinds of fairies, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about like the kind of elementals, the different types of elementals. So fairies in and of themselves are elementals. They're elemental spirits, which means they are stewards of the elements. We have fire elements, which are called, historically they're called salamanders. I don't really know if I really buy into all of that. It was Parcelaus? I don't know, some ancient dude in a robe somewhere, and he basically made most of these connections. And I just don't really believe necessarily that the fire elementals are salamanders. However, that's why we get a lot of, especially if you look in like the new age kind of Wicca and witchcraft, You're going to see like different guardians of the elements. And, traditionally salamanders are a fire element. But I want to talk about maybe a different idea. And so if I think about fire, I think about the creation of the universe. I think about the energy that animates us, the warmth, behind that. And I think about probably the most primal kinds of elementals that there are. And I don't think that they're salamanders. I think that when I think of fire elementals, I think of like lava and magma. And I think of like the deep volcanoes and in the ocean that heat up the ocean, and the volcanoes on land and things like that. Nothing against salamanders, but when I think of fairy elementals as far as fire goes, I think of more like elementals that kind of regulate and govern volcanoes and lava and magma, and even possibly some of these more ancient like elements that are in more the center of the earth. I tend to think of the fire elementals as not as underworld elementals, meaning that I don't really see them as, elementals that live on land. I see most of them, personally, I feel most of them live like underground. However, there would be an exception for them, which would be like natural forest fires or things like that. But we could also think of fire elementals as far as even the sun could technically be a fire elemental, right? And so I kind of think of them more as like these ancient primordial kind of in the core of the earth kind of beings, that anytime there's like a volcano erupting or something like that, I tend to think that it's more of the will of the fire fairies. Okay, does that make sense with everybody? Victoria says. Victoria's laughing at me, an ancient dude in a robe somewhere. Kathy says, "Oh, I agree about lava and volcanoes and fire. Salamander's just confusing. Salamanders just doesn't really make any sense. To me, it doesn't." But anyways, I digress. I'm glad you got something out of that. There's also, but the fire elementals, in my opinion, are probably the most vague and abstract. I mean, they're kind of hard to wrap your brain around, whereas the other elementals are a lot easier to wrap your brain around. But I wanted to start with the hardest one first. We also have water elementals, which are like sprites, undines, naiads, mermaids, selkies, right? So they protect more of like the water. They protect lakes and ponds and rivers and the ocean wildlife, the natural springs, the water beds under the table, the primordial waters, okay? And however that tends to manifest on land especially too. So I tend to think of like mermaids, and that's what most people I think of, or like water sprites. They like tornadoes in the water. What are they called? They're called like a sprite, right? I think they're called a sprite. But also you can find water elementals, water fairies at like waterfalls, anywhere that there is a natural occurrence of water, not really man-made, especially man-made because we tend to put a lot of chemicals in man-made. Like if you have a pool out in your backyard and you use chlorine and heavy chemicals in it, don't expect to find any water elementals over there. You're probably not going to, because that is toxic to them. So anywhere that there's like a natural water formation, that's where you're going to really be able to connect with the water fairies. All right, so the next one is the air fairies. So there are also air fairies. Typically speaking, these are called sylphs. There really isn't another name for it. I did a lot of research on this, and I tried to find more types of air elementals. If you know of more air elementals, put some in the comments below. Let me know so I can do more research on that. But what I found is that in most cases, it's very rare to find cultural names for air elementals. But we can think about the air elementals as governing the weather patterns, like rainstorms, thunderstorms, lightning, wind, that sort of thing, tornadoes, that sort of stuff. So the sylphs are, usually the ones that are that are portrayed with the fairy wings, right? Because of the air. If you do see something flittering about, it is likely an air elemental, though it could be an earth elemental. And they're kind of hard to distinguish, but there are two kind of camps on this. There is the camp where people kind of believe that the only flying kind of elementals are the air elementals, and that what distinguishes the earth elementals is that they do not have wings or they do not fly. They are on the ground only. Okay? So I kind of tend to personally believe that the air fairies are the ones that can fly, and the earth fairies are the ones that can't fly. But here's the thing: we're going to talk about shape shifting here in just a moment too. So it kind of changes things, and it kind of just depends. But we also have the earth-based fairies, which basically watch over vegetation. I mean, they're in charge of making things grow. They're in charge of the land animals and that sort of thing. And these guys, we know them mostly as like brownies, gnomes, elves, and I don't mean elves as in like the Nordic elves, which were like a race of people. It's different. It's so you're gonna have to distinguish between Nordic elves and Nordic mythos from Celtic mythos, but you can kind of see where, I mean, they're right next to each other. Sweden and Norway and all of those countries are right above the British Isles of Ireland, Scotland, places like that. So, and they were constantly fighting and going back and forth and raiding one another. So, there is some crossover, and that's why it can kind of be confusing when you start getting into this and you start like researching elves. Elves, we're not talking about fairy elves as in the Nordic race of elves, if that makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about the elementals. So just to wrap up that thought, whether you get the good side or the bad side of a fairy really wholly depends on you. If you are someone that is not eco-conscious, meaning that you overuse plastics and paper, and you're generally wasteful, and you don't try to conserve like at all, you're likely going to see the dark side of fairies. So I wouldn't even, if you are someone that is like just living in the world of convenience, the technological age, the age where of everything's disposable, like you don't recycle anything, I would say don't even try with the fairies because you're likely going to get the adverse effect. Also, if you have land or if you have a house or something like that, and you are someone who sprays a lot of chemicals on your lawn, try to get rid of weeds, you try to kill, you get the bug guy coming in all the time to spray, kill all the bugs around and things like that. There are natural ways that you can deal with weeds and pests and things like that. And the distinction here that I'm making is that you're using harsh chemicals. With the harsh chemical, the only intention that harsh chemical has is to kill. The fairies are about the continuation of life, to perpetuate the cycle of life. If you approach your area, because you're going to have guardians of your area, you're going to have specific fairies like in your neighborhood. You're going to have specific fairies that guard your town or your city. You're going to have specific fairies that guard your state, your country, your continent. So it's like a macrocosm and a microcosm. So we live in a microcosm because we are individualistic beings, right? And so depending on how you treat your land, the area in which you live that you are borrowing from them, it really depends a lot on the type of luck or abundance or prosperity that you will have. The most, it's going to be really, really hard to gain the favor of the fairies if you do these things. And you're really going to, if you do some of these things, you're going to have to overcompensate in other areas. We're not all perfect, I'm not perfect. I have a water bottle that I fill up. It's plastic. Every couple days I throw it out. I get a new one. I recycle it. Should I be using plastic bottles? No, not really. But to kind of counteract that, I do other things, meaning like I recycle. I don't spray chemicals on my lawn. I don't do harsh chemicals to get rid of pests. I build sort of nature reserves on my land. And I'm going to talk more about, I don't want to go too much into it today because I'm going to talk more about that on the next one, about certain things that I have done to attract fairies. Okay. But like I said before, if you are not conserving in any way, you want to think about it like on a scale. What side is heavier? Is the conservation side heavier, or is the disposable like waste side heavier? And the fairies are going to judge you based on that. They will read your intentions. They watch you. They see what you're doing. They see how what you're doing is affecting the environment. And if you are quote unquote a bad person to the fairies, you're going to have things happen. You're going to have bad luck. You're going to have negative things happen on your property. Things that are like a tower experience in tarot, where it's like kind of comes out of nowhere, things you can't really control. So if you are someone, if you like, say, for example, you move into a new house and you have like a haunting or something like that, you need a reader to come out to see if it's a ghost, or if it's a nature spirit, or if it's a poltergeist, because there's a lot of things that are going on. But if you don't feel you have any spirits in your house, or you don't feel like you have any poltergeist activity, but still bad things are happening, pipes are breaking, your foundation cracks, like whatever. It could be because the fairies they don't really care about you, and they're not going to bless your property, if that makes sense at all. Is there such thing as a house fairy? I don't think that there is a such thing as a house fairy, simply because fairies have free will. But however, that being said, I think that you can make allies with the fairies, and I think that you can invite house fairies in. Like, for example, one way to invite house fairies in would be to set up some plants in your house. I'm going to talk more about this at the next one. But yeah, I think that you can have house fairies. But that kind of comes along much later, after you have an established relationship with them. Now, can you have fairies that just simply come into your house and create mischief? Yeah, you can have that too. But as far as like helpful house spirits, I think as long as you have an established relationship with them, and you give them offerings, which we'll talk about that in the next video, and you make efforts to conserve and to better the environment, then yes, I believe that the fairies, I don't think that you have like a house fairy that kind of like lives in your house, but I do feel like the general area fairies will come and they will give you blessings, if that makes sense. So I do have a story that I wanted to tell you. Oh, wow. Latanya says, I never thought about that. I feel terrible. My daughter is terrified of spiders as our rental is infested with them. Brown recluses, fire ants, so horrible. Well, if it's a life, here's the thing with brown recluses. If it's a life or death situation, I'm pretty sure the fairies are going to understand. But there are some natural things you can do. But also, I don't know if you have cats, but I have 3 cats. No, you do have cats, Latanya. Ever since I got the 3 cats, well, I've been collecting them for a while because I'm a crazy cat lady. But ever since I've gotten the 3 cats, I've noticed a definite decrease in the amount of like pests and things like that I have on my property. And I feel that that's more of a natural way to deal with it. It just depends, like, what are you using? Are you using stuff to kill them, like in a mean way? But brown recluses, I would definitely say anything that's going to cause you harm or potentially be fatal to you, I would say you have sovereignty on that. And I would say that you can use whatever method, you have available to get rid of those pests. I wouldn't feel bad about that. But there are other things you can do. So if these are things that are necessary for you that hurt the environment, then we need to find, if you do one thing that hurts the environment, we need to find 3 other things that you can do that will kind of counteract that karma. If you really want to work with the fairies, it's up to you. Latanya says, interesting, I recently told my family that we are going to start recycling. And recycling is a great a great decision because it helps all of the elemental fairies. So it keeps the trash off of the land, it keeps the trash out of the sea, right? You can even burn trash as an offering to the fire elementals, that sort of thing. So recycling is definitely one of the key things that you can do. Reducing your use of plastics, reducing your use of the foam kind of stuff. You know, using cloth bags instead of plastic or paper bags to go grocery shopping in, or when you go shopping, period. You know, that sort of thing. Buying a more of an eco car. I have a Honda Civic that has a eco on it, eco-friendly. We've had many, not electric. Are they electric cars? What are they? They're not electric. They don't plug in. They're the other kind. Someone help me out here. What are they called? They're not electric cars, but they're something else. Battery. They have like a battery. Is it hydraulic? What is it? Oh, well, someone help me out here. Kathy says, we have another live session on natural ways to take care of your home pest control. I could probably do that. That could be like the third, yeah, that could be like the third part of this series. I could definitely do something like that. So, hybrid. Thank you, Victoria. A hybrid car. So I have a story to share, personal story. So, well, I actually started working with the fairies when I went vegan for 3 years. I went vegan for 3 years, from 2012, 2013, and 2014. I think towards the end of 2014, I was doing more vegetarian. But I gave up meat. I gave up dairy. The first year, I ate nothing but raw food. The second year, I started eating more. I did more of the raw tofu. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, where it's like basically in the morning and lunch, you eat raw foods, and then for dinner, you eat some cooked vegan food. And then I kind of slowly tapered off of that, started eating more cooked vegan food, and started working more like eggs and a little bit of cheese kind of back into my diet. Well, I was also doing other things, like I stopped buying paper towels. I started, using more natural kind of detergents and things like that, because I was very ill. I was very sick. And I wish I could say it was for ethics, but I was not vegan for ethics. I was vegan for my health, and then I kind of got into the ethical side of it, and I learned a lot. I mean, I don't regret my time as being vegan vegetarian at all. My heart chakra blew wide open. I became so sensitive to all the suffering in the world. I became sensitive to all the ways that we are, destroying this planet and the factory farming and things like that. I am no longer vegan. I do eat meat now. However, I feel like my time as a vegan really helped me understand the gravity of the situation. And I think it really made me more sensitive. And I think it made me really appreciate my food more. And I was able to get off the sugar, and I learned to really like vegetables and things like that. Anyways, long story short, I was also, I didn't want to buy paper towels anymore. And so I made a vow. I said, I will never buy paper towels again. I will just use towels. I'll just wash them. There's no sense in doing that. About maybe like a year later, I went ahead and bought a package of paper towels because I'm human, and we get accustomed to the convenience of certain things. And to be honest, I was tired of doing a weekly load of towels every week. And I thought, how nice would it be to just have some paper towels that I could just throw away? So I went ahead and bought some. That morning I woke up, and this is common too. This is a common thing that you'll hear people say when fairies mess with you. My hair was long because I was growing it out for about 3 years. I had the worst knot. I've never ever had this happen before. I haven't had it happen since because I don't buy paper towels anymore. I woke up with the worst knot in my hair that I had to shave my head. I had to shave it with a number 2 all the way up to about right here. And I had to do the thing where I had it kind of long going down and kind of shaved and spiky in the back. because I couldn't get it out. No amount of conditioner would get it out. And so I'm like, the fairies are pissed. The fairies are pissed at me. So after that point, never bought paper towels again. Never had a problem with my hair knotting like that again. I mean, it was bad, you guys. It was like someone was just going to town for days and days on my hair, just creating tiny little knots. Couldn't get it out. It was so matted, and my hair is not the type of hair that mats very easily. In fact, I have to put so much product in my hair to get it to do anything, because it just wants to like lay there flat as a board. You know what I mean? And so that was I have a couple other stories like this, but that was probably the most profound, where I had gone against my vow. I had gone against them after I had been making allies with them and doing these great things, and they weren't even pissed about me eating meat again. I think it was more just the disposableness of the paper towels, the selfishness of that, if that makes sense. So that's my story about the fairies and the paper towels and the knot in my hair. You know, you might think back to you might pay attention to that. You might pay attention to things that happen to you like that. And you might pay attention to maybe ask yourself, am I doing something that I said I wouldn't do? Am I breaking a vow? You know, something like that. So let's talk about what fairies actually look like. Okay, so I'm sure everybody's really curious about that. Fairies, everything is actually a being of light. You know, we talk about angels being a being of light, fairies being a being of light. Actually, everything is a being of light. We are beings of light. Anything that is living in our universe is a being of light, even us. We are made up of atoms and molecules, and we have cells and things like that, and we have structures called DNA and stuff, but the DNA and the cells are basically placeholders, if you will. They have within them their own ancient programs, things like that. However, what science that is really, really exciting, what science is really uncovering now is that the way our cells talk to each other is through emitting photons. Photons are light. And we're starting to understand that light is a carrier of information. We can program information into light. Your cells talk to one another through emitting photons. If photons are like little, you could think about it like radio waves. You can think about it like the internet, you know. I talk about this a little bit in the Akashic Records. I'm starting to work on some Akashic Records trainings right now, and that's going to be coming up June. So in a couple of months, you might want to look for that. But we've been seeing lately, let's say within the last like 10 years, 15 years or so, that there is actually what's called a biophotonic emission that our bodies give off. So yeah, we are beings of atoms and molecules and things like that. That is the physicality of our existence. But more so, there is an energy that actually animates us and emits light, emits photons. We can see this through the biofield. If you have those special cameras, we can also link this to like auras and things like that. But we're actually finding that everything emits light, and we don't emit very much light, but we do emit some, and it's very, very hard to detect. Well, fairies are less physical than us. They are light, but I would say they are kind of like almost pure light. I would say that they're much more light than us, but they are not completely light, because they can still shapeshift and things like that. So you would think that they would have to have some sort of physicality to them, unless you believe in possession, which we'll talk about that here in a minute. But so, you know, do fairies look like Tinkerbell? No. Do they look like little humanoid creatures? No. Do they actually look like mermaids? No. They don't. They don't really look like that. It depends on the type of elemental fairy, first and foremost, but, you know, they don't really look like those things. They have no real personification. So, but I do feel like fairies can inhabit or possess people or animals. You know, I kind of discussed about earlier how fairies are kind of remnants of the magical people of the 12th of Day Danon and how they lived in fairy mounds and they only came out at night. It's my personal thoughts that they actually do indeed come out during the day, but they would be seen. So they actually shapeshift into animals. That's one theory. Or they possess animals. That's another theory. So we could actually think, and Victoria said, what about the bees? So we could actually think about fairies possessing bees to carry out specific programs for the environment, right? Because how else would they really influence them? Just think about that for a moment. If we were to believe in fairies, and if we were to believe that fairies are stewards of the earth, and if we were to believe that fairies are the guardians of organic matter, living vegetation, animals, that sort of thing, how would they actually influence them? Well, the only thing that I can really think of is through possession, the spirit of the fairy possessing a living thing. But not just animals. I do feel that fairies can actually shapeshift into human-like beings. And that's kind of where we get like mermaids and things like that, where we have like the whole half fish, half human, or the Selkies where we have the half seal and the half human. And I think the way that you can tell, because I've seen things like this before, I think the way that you can tell is that things just look a little off. Things just look a little weird, if that makes sense. You might see an animal out in nature that it's supposed to be that animal, but it looks a little bit different, or it looks a little bit odd or eccentric. Or you might even see like a distortion over the being, meaning that you can especially if you're very clairvoyant and you really develop your psychic abilities like most of us do here, you can sense that sort of cloaking on them. Also, if you're really, really good at reading auras, you might find that an animal that has been either shapeshifted or is being possessed by a fairy might have a little bit of a different aura than the other animals around in that area. So you'll have to kind of play around with it. Just pay attention to nature. Like there's people out there. I've met some people that just like, I've also met people that just like, I have one other story and I'll tell you about that really quickly. Now they make washable paper towels. Yeah, so there's options now. Hi, Jazzy. Sorry to be late. No problem. I'm very sensitive about earth care, but who knows? I had an Irish client on the hotlines one time. We got on the topic of fairies, and I thought I saw fairy shapes in the clouds. First time for me, I never saw it again. Fairies seem very picky about our behavior. They really are. They really are. I have another story. I've talked about it before. I was in a car accident one Christmas, and I got T-boned in the whole front of my car. I couldn't get out. They had to get the jaws of life to get me out. I was only like 19 at the time, so I was very young and very afraid. I've associated this with being an angel, but in my opinion, I don't really see that a major distinction between angels and fairies. There is, but I don't really see a huge one. I kind of see it all as kind of like the same thing, if that makes sense. But I had, and I was out in the middle of nowhere. Some of you probably remember this story, but I was out in the middle of nowhere, literally in the desert, a 4-way stop at like maybe 1 o'clock in the morning. It was pitch black outside. There was no streetlights whatsoever. I don't even know how I got into this car accident. Me and this girl, we just didn't see each other. I don't know how you don't see each other in the middle of the desert, but yeah, we didn't see each other. And I remember after I got hit, some random person just showed up at my window and asked me if I was okay and told me they were going to call 911. And then I look up to thank them and they're gone. Like, they're just gone. Like, I don't know where they are. And all I can remember that it had a feminine presence, but I don't remember what they look like. I don't remember what their voice sounded like or anything. They were just like, they were there, but they just weren't there. So that's another situation where I've had like a fairy / angel kind of encounter where I do feel like someone was watching out for me, and that could have been a nature fairy that was, taking shape shifting or taking on the form of a human like person or creature to carry out a specific purpose. And that specific purpose was to get help. And then they were just gone. I mean, just this rant. And I asked the other girl, I said, was that other girl with you? She said, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see anybody. In the middle of the desert, at 1 o'clock in the morning, there was nobody out there. But there was someone out there, and someone called 911, and then the fire trucks came and things like that. So it was definitely one of those like weird kind of experiences where, yeah, Kathy says, did anyone call 911? Yeah, the fire trucks started showing up and everything like that. I don't know. It was just weird. It was bizarre. Okay, so I want to kind of wrap up because we're at the hour mark. Let me see. I think we're just about done with this first training. So we talked about fairies looking different. Okay, so should we work with fairies? Are there dangers? So here's my opinion. If you don't do anything for conservation, and even if you just talk about it, like, we should save the ocean, like you share stuff on social media, but you don't actually do anything, you're probably not going to be able to work with the Fae. It's probably not a good idea. I really wouldn't recommend it. Not until you're willing to change your ways. And if you invite them in and you pester them and you bring notice to yourself, because that's another thing too, like that's a really core shamanistic, animistic kind of belief, is that you'd be very careful about the spirits that you draw attention to yourself with, because not all spirits are going to have good intentions. So I wouldn't draw attention to yourself if you're not interested in conservation at all. However, if you do anything for conservation and it outweighs the negative that you do, I would absolutely start working with the fairies, because it's so important that we do. And what are some things that are going to happen? Let's say what's going to happen if you aren't very interested in conservation. Well, it's more like little annoyances. They're not going to kill you or anything like that. They're not going to kidnap your children or anything like that, okay? They're just going to wreak slight havoc in your life. They're just going to do more annoying things. It's just going to be more of an annoyance rather than anything, okay? But, if you do want to work with the Fae, and why should we work with the Fae? Well, 2 reasons. One, not the most important in no specific order, but in the order that would probably entice a person, just being real here, is that the Fae have an immense power to bless us with the most extreme abundance and prosperity. If you have a lot of fairies around you, you're going to have the fairy luck. You're just going to have that lucky kind of golden aura about you. Things are just going to tend to work out because the fairies want to help you keep doing the things that are helping the environment. Okay, they want to invest in you to keep you doing things that are beneficial. So, in my opinion, that's probably the most enticing reason why you would want to work with the Fae. Now, realistically, the most realistic reason you want to work with the Fae is because it's just good for the environment, and I feel like a lot of what's wrong with the environment right now is human error. And I feel like if we don't check ourselves, then we're going to ruin this planet. And I don't know where we're going to go because there's nowhere else to go. Mars is not habitable yet. They're working on it, and I don't know if that's... We'll just do to Mars what we did to here. You know what I mean? So in my opinion, abundance and prosperity aside, it's just simply the right thing to do. But you cannot be a hypocrite. You cannot be a wasteful person. If you want the blessings of the Fae, and they will give it to you, you must put forth the effort. And it's not a one and done type deal. It's not like, okay, I'm just going to do these really good things and then I'll have the blessings of the Fae. No, this is a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle choice, okay? Jazzy says, do we have different classes of fairies? There are lower classes of angels? Yes, we talked about that earlier. So watch the replay. There, we talk about the elementals. hide your keys kind of things. Yeah. Jazzy says, no, I'm not drawn to fairies, but they sound interesting, right? Yeah, they're interesting. You have to be, it's just one of those things where you will get a lot out of it, but you have to be worthy of it. And that's the thing that I just can't stress enough. So do we spray for bugs around our home, but we can compensate? Yeah, we can compensate in other ways. It just has to, you have to do at least double or triple an effort in other ways, right? So, for spraying for bugs and things like that, I would consider that more of a sovereignty thing. I would consider that more of like a life or death situation, because there are, things that can come in and hurt you. Actually, my husband's coworker just got bit by a brown recluse in his house, and it was disgusting. It was like he got bit on his stomach. His whole stomach is black and like just peeling and rotting off. So, in that kind of situation, I pretty much feel like, humans have sovereignty over that and should be able to defend themselves. If something's going to come in and bite you, or something's going to come in and attack you, and that was unprovoked and simply because you're there. I mean, he got bit in his sleep, so he wasn't doing anything to harm this spider. Spider just came in and bit him. I think in that sort of situation, you have a more of a rightful, kind of argument. It's a little bit more righteous versus just like, paper towels and buying bottled water and not recycling it, or just throwing food out that you could have, just generally being wasteful. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. How long did you research this? I've been working with fairies since I started working with angels, which is probably 2014. So I would say I've kind of waved back and forth. I actually have a fairy altar right here. You can see my fairy altar. It might be difficult to see, but I have fairies and I have unicorns and I have dragons, dragons could also be considered another type of fire elemental. Okay. So there's different, and I have unicorns and stones and things like that up there. I have a little, statue of a mushroom right there. And so, I have been collecting fairy stuff and working with fairies, meaning like putting up an altar, doing offerings, things like that, probably since I started being vegan, which would probably be 2012. But I don't think I really got serious about them until like maybe 2014, 2015 or so. And again, I kind of go back and forth. At some points, they're really, really interesting to me. During the winter, they tend to not really be that interesting to me. I tend to connect more with the fairies during spring and summer, just because and actually I've been out walking every day for 30 minutes and really just absorbing nature. And that's why my allergies are so bad, because of ragweed and stuff. But, watching things come to life. There's a specific tree. I wanted to talk about that tree. The tree will be the last thing I'll talk about today. Okay. And how I've seen fairies and how you can see fairies and how they might actually manifest and appear outside of shape-shifting. So how can we see fairies? Well, fairies are easiest to see at night. And I actually live in a area I live in Missouri, which is basically like, I'm getting a link and I'm talking at the same time. I live in Missouri, which is basically like the upper part of the swampland, swamp, and also like a forest. Missouri's kind of weird because it's like right on that climate border between being tropical, the tropic band, and also the kind of like the marshy kind of swampland. So Missouri has a little bit of everything, to be honest with you. But in front of my house is like a really deep forest. Like there's neighborhoods, and then like over kind of like on this side over here, there's just like forest, and it just kind of goes on and on and on. And, when I used to walk at night a lot, I don't walk at night too much anymore because it did kind of freak me out. But when I used to walk at night, I would see, lights in the forest. And that was kind of freaky. I mean, it did kind of freak me out a little bit, and there would be nothing there. There would be nothing there. And there would just be like you would see like kind of twinkling lights, or you would see like a light appear and then it would go out, and then you would see it over here, and then you'd see it over here, and then you'd see, it would be like this weird thing where you would see lights in the forest. Um, you can also see fairies. There's also a lot of fairy rings around here. Now, I didn't really talk about fairy rings that much. Fairy rings, so I talked about the Tuatha people, they live in the mounds, right? Well, there is a doorway, and the lore states that, the actual fairy ring, which is the mushroom ring, or it could be any vegetation, doesn't have to be mushrooms. It could be flowers, and it could be, any type of weird circle kind of formation of vegetation. And so, if you see fairy rings, those tend to be doorways to the fairy mounds. They tend to be kind of like portals. So if you do see any fairy rings around, then you know that you likely have fairies in the area. There's likely a fairy mound in the area. There's also this one tree in my neighborhood that we walk by on our route every single time that we go, me and my husband. And there is this tree, and this tree is the weirdest, most unique tree I've ever seen. And it kind of comes up and it kind of bows over, and around it is like a circle formation of vegetation. It's the coolest thing. When it finally comes into bloom, I'll try to get a good picture of it and show you guys. But ever since I've ever walked by that tree, I'm like, that's a fairy tree, because you just know, right? And so you can also see fairies more clairvoyantly when, Jazzy was talking about seeing fairies in the clouds and things like that. So you can scry them. You can also see them clairvoyantly, where you just kind of know that their presence is there, kind of like with spirits or ancestors or other kind of high vibrational beings, things like that. Also, during the daytime, you can actually see fairies. Like if you see something kind of flitter out of the corner of your eye and you know it's not like a bug or something like that, it's likely a fairy. If you have wildlife that kind of comes up to you, I've had that many times where just random wildlife comes up, squirrels, groundhogs. I've had raccoons, possums, birds just randomly kind of come up to you. There's another idea about fairies being birds and being like, we kind of think about when we see cardinals as like a message of spirit, like someone on the other side is thinking of you. I had the most beautiful experience the other day. I was, me and my neighbor on this side, we talk all the time. Her porch is like right next to my porch, and there's like a fence that divides us. So we literally just hang out on our respective porches and just talk, because we're just literally right there. We were talking the other night. We were talking about, what we were going to grow in our gardens this year. We're talking about that. I was saying, I'm going to grow some bush beans and some tomatoes, and I'm going to do an herb garden. Well, in the middle of this conversation, the brightest red cardinal came by, just plopped itself right in between us on the fence, stood there for a couple minutes, and just like stared at us. And it was the coolest thing ever. We were just like, where did this bird come from? Because it just kind of came out of nowhere, just kind of stood there and in between us. And so we had that really amazing experience. And I do consider that to be like a fairy type of experience. Jazzy says, I think you have to like fairies and be genuine about it too. Right. And it's important to take care of the earth. And here's the thing too, even if you do things to take care of the earth, you're going to naturally be blessed by the fairy energy anyways. Even if you don't want to like actually work with them on a one-on-one basis, you're still going to be blessed, because whether you work with them or not, they're going to want to keep you doing those things. They want you to be healthy and vibrant and to feel like some sort of satisfaction from doing those things. Animals feel safe with you. Yes, they do. Actually, when I was growing up, my mom runs a wildlife rehabilitation center. She really only works with like desert tortoises now. She runs a desert tortoise sanctuary. And when I was growing up, we would have rabbits and birds and snakes and so many different animals. And we would birds and nurse them back to life. That's just my mom. That's what she does. She's a mother to thousands and thousands of beings over the course of her life, I'm sure. So I kind of grew up with that as well. And my mom is really into fairies. My mom is probably more the fairy person than I am. she is a fairy witch. She collects fairies and things like that. So some of the fairy stuff that has rubbed off on me has been from her. But you know, that's another reason why I think animals feel so safe. And also, I'm going to talk more about this in the next training. You know, some of the conservation things that I do on my land and my property. You know, I don't want to spoil that, so I won't talk about that too much. But yeah, birds come around and hang out. Yeah. Oh, fireflies, absolutely, Latanya. Latanya says, I've always felt that fireflies were of the fairy realm. Yeah. And in fact, I was actually listening to a speech and about the early Tuatha De Danann peoples. And it's also like kind of like a bog, kind of marshy kind of land. And I am the bog witch of the neighborhood. And that will make more sense in the next video about why that is and how I kind of get that title. But yeah, fireflies are really well known in like kind of like the swampy areas and things like that. And so it's originally thought that the people thought that fireflies were in fact fairies. There is a legend out there. John the Baptist feast days. Is it John the Baptist feast day? Someone correct me if you know this, if you are really into saints and things like that and know this. But there is a folklore tradition out there that I believe it's in June, that towards the end of June, there's a feast day for a saint. I think it's St. John the Baptist. But basically, you go out after the feast at night, you wait for the sun to set, and you go out looking for fireflies. You go out looking for the fairies. And it said that wherever you find a big concentration of fireflies, there is a treasure to be found underneath the earth. It's just a folklore thing. I don't know. I've never done it or, you know, involved in it or anything like that. But there is absolutely like folklore around fireflies and fairies and treasure / abundance. So we can see this theme kind of continues on. Cardinal, Jazzy says the cardinal, that's your signpost bird. Oh, yes. Yeah, they do bring messages for sure. Jazzy says, I remember what you shared before about your mom. Birds hang out in gangs sometimes in the backyard, having meetings and chirping up a storm. That's so funny. That's so funny. So I talked about the tree. I talked about the light in the forest. Have we talked about everything I want to talk about? I think so. Does anybody have any questions about anything I've talked about? Does anybody have any comments about anything I've talked about? If you would, let me know right in the comments below what you thought was the most interesting thing that you got out of today. And I also want to invite you, okay? So as I said, I will be doing a part 2 for this. And it's going to be on May 1st. It's going to be in Susie's group, the Witchy School of Wisdom, for her Beltane Bash. We're getting together. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be 5 days. There's going to be so many different presenters that are going to be talking about different magical type of topics. This is Susie's first video summit, so I really want us to support her. She's a Victoria Business Mentorship alumni, so she's been with me for a couple years now, and I was with her in a couple group programs with other coaches even before that. So I've known Susie for a long time, and she's going to put on a great event. She is so dedicated and passionate about what she does, okay? So I'll be speaking on May 1st, but it's going to be starting the last week of April until the first week of May. We're going to be celebrating Beltane. In the next video, I'm going to be talking more about how to actually make allies. So I'm going to be talking about what kind of offerings they like. I'm going to be talking about creating a fairy door. I'm going to be talking about creating a fairy altar. So many different types of things. I'm going to be talking about the fairy court. I'm going to be talking about how to identify. So let's say you actually attract some fairies, you start seeing some fairies. How can you identify what kind of elemental they are and where they appear as far as like the court? Are they a messenger fairy? Are they a type of royalty? There's many different types there's a hierarchy when it comes to the fairies. So I want to give you guys this link really quickly. And I want you guys to go sign up, because when you sign up, you will get notifications of what everybody is going to be talking about, and then you'll get the reminders. Okay, so you'll get reminders, and you'll be able to see all of the discussions, all of the topics coming up, and just let's support Susie. You know, Susie's pretty awesome. Yeah, I see hundreds of them at our local park all the time at night. Oh, well, it makes sense that they would be at a park because that's a conservation area. I love to record them, but their lights flicker so fast. Oh, it is. It is difficult to capture them. Hi, Kimberly. Good to see you. Oh, that's okay. Hi, Bonnie. Did you say what you wanted to say about the trees? Yeah, so I have this tree, and yeah, so I have the tree, and it's, you'll know when you see a fairy tree because there will typically be like a ring around it, and or it will have a unique kind of twisted formation. Um, you'll just know, especially if you start working with the fairies for any period of time, you'll be able to walk by something, by a tree, and you will just know because it will have a magical kind of energy. And also you will see some sort of, the two telltale signs that I noticed personally just from my experiences, Bonnie, are they'll have a ring around the tree in some way, shape, or form. It could mean that the grass just doesn't, and I don't mean like a landscaped, I don't mean like a landscape ring. What I mean is like the grass will just stop growing in like a circle around it. It's like the weirdest thing. And also it will have a very unique kind of twisted formation. Sure, Kathy, I'm going to dig that up. Kimberly says, curious if you have any thoughts on the Feinhorn community. I think they're all about fairies. I've never heard of them. Or maybe I have. Have I? Oh, interesting. Feinhorn is a village in Moray, Scotland. It is located on the eastern shore of Feinhorn Bay, immediately south of the Moray Firth. Feinhorn is a 3 miles northwest of Kinloss, and it looks like it is a spiritual community, like an eco village. Is that what it is? Very interesting. I'm gonna definitely read about that more. Latonia says, awesome, because I'm going to have the perfect place to create a fairy home around a tree in our huge back garden. Yeah, awesome. And, you know, these are just little things that you can start doing to kind of make allies. And one of the most powerful ways I've noticed to make allies with the fairies is to give them a place to exist, give them a home, give them a place to call their own, you know, sacrifice part of your land or sacrifice part of your space for them. And that's like a huge, huge gesture. So Victoria says, there is a tree in my neighborhood that looks like lovers hugging. It's probably a fairy tree. Take a picture of it and let me see. Post it in the group. I would love to see that tree. Okay. All right, guys, I will see you in the group. I'm going to be gone next week, by the way. I will not be here. I'm going to be on spring break vacation. I'm going to try really hard not to work at all. But if you don't hear or see anything from me next week, don't be alarmed. I'm just on vacation. And I will see you guys on May 1st for how to make allies with the fairy kingdom. Bye.